Welcome. You're listening to Book of the Day from NPR. I'm Chloe Veltman. Today we're looking at two history books that make a strong case for why learning about the past is so critical to our understanding about the world we're living in today. In a bit, we'll hear about the final throes of the American Civil War and how President Abraham Lincoln's assassin, John Wilkes Booth, wasn't at all the man most of us think he was. But first we have an interview about a posthumous collection of writings by the revered American historian David McCullough. McCullough's daughter, Dorie McCullough Lawson, who co-edited the collection, and historian Jon Meacham, who wrote the foreword, tell NPR's Scott Simon about McCullough's endless curiosity and his insistence on not looking back at the past condescendingly, but rather looking it in the eye. That's ahead.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Boll & Branch. Turn your bed into a sanctuary this fall with their buttery, breathable bedding. Enjoy 15% off your first set of sheets at BOLL&branch.com with code NPR. Exclusions apply.
This message comes from Bonterra. Your nonprofit's mission is big, but your team is small. With fundraising software from Bonterra's Network for Good, you can focus on changing lives. Big impact, less stress. Learn more at bonterratech.com/NFG.
Until his death in 2022, this was the voice of American history.
Good evening, I'm David McCullough, and this is the first program in the American Experience.
David McCullough wrote huge best-selling books that range from the Johnstown Flood to the Brooklyn Bridge and Panama Canal, John Adams, Teddy Roosevelt, and Harry Truman. He hosted the American Experience on PBS and narrated Ken Burns' The Civil War.
The Civil War was fought in 10,000 places, from Val Verde, New Mexico, and Tullahoma, Tennessee, to St. Albans, Vermont, and Fernandina on the Florida coast.
History Matters is a new book that collects some of David McCullough's speeches, interviews, and essays in which he spoke of the importance of history and the joy he took in writing it. The book has been edited by his daughter, Dorie McCullough Lawson, and his longtime researcher, Michael Hill, and has a foreword from the historian Jon Meacham. Dorie McCullough Lawson and Jon Meacham join us now. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dorie, your father says in here he never knew the theme of a book, but discovered it while writing. Did you discover a theme in this collection while putting it together?
I did. I think I discovered several themes. Number one would be his curiosity, that he was interested in everything, everyone, took time to listen to people. And I also would say that an overall theme was that he was the same person throughout his life, and he was devoted to kind of the primary values, the old verities of courage, respecting one another, devotion to truth, a loathing of hypocrisy, self-reliance, and as he said, the power of simple goodness.
Jon Meacham, you say that David McCullough's writings tutored us in the art of being human. How so?
My sense, I encountered McCullough first, obviously, as a reader. I read the Johnstown Flood at an early age. And what you see in, I think, the canon of work is this perennial struggle of human beings to do the right thing, particularly when it's not easy. And I think that's a fundamental human task that he returned to again and again.
Jon Meacham, let me ask you about what I found to be an extraordinary essay in here, a commencement address at Providence College in 2018. It's called The Importance of Luck, and it tells the story of a propitious fog in Brooklyn.
Yes, without that fog, we might not be having this conversation with these particular accents. They might be British. History is contingent. The fog made Washington's early triumphs in the military phase of the Revolution possible. Geography, as Napoleon once said, is destiny. Another example of this would be the weather breaking on June 6, 1944, when there was only the slightest window for the Allied troops to cross the Channel and liberate a continent. There is this consistent reality in human affairs that there are factors beyond our control. And seems to me, and I think I learned a lot of this from David's work, what is remarkable and essential is that human beings be equipped to either overcome bad luck or take advantage of good luck.
I want to ask you both about something David McCullough wrote in an unpublished essay, 1990, called The Good Work of America, and I'm going to take pleasure in quoting it now. Quote, "We are the people who built the Panama Canal and the Golden Gate Bridge, the Mount Wilson Observatory, the Library of Congress, Lincoln Center. We invented jazz and the General Hospital. Our productive power turned the tide of world history." I think you both know many people would now add, we are the people who supported slavery, imperialism, and inequality. How do you reconcile those two views of this country?
You don't. And I would argue that the central task of a biographer, the central task of a historian, and yes, the central task of a citizen is not to, as Arthur Schlesinger once said, not to look back at the past condescendingly, but to look it in the eye. And by looking American history in the eye, we see what we got right and we see what we got wrong, Scott, as you enumerate, and we draw the lesson, ideally, that we must seek the light, always aware that darkness can fall.
He believed that history, we needed to be looking at history and periods of history again and again, and that we would reevaluate the way that we saw the past. He was an optimist, and he said and writes in this book that he was a short-term pessimist and a long-term optimist. That is very accurate about the way that he saw the world.
He wrote, and this really got me thinking, there was no simpler time.
I believe that's true. I believe that we do a disservice to history by acting as if somehow there was a once upon a time where things were easier, where people were more inclined to do the right thing. It has always been a struggle between our worst instincts and what Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. And the remarkable thing about the American experience is that for all of our faults, for all of our vices, our better angels at critical hours have enabled us to create a more perfect union that people want to come to, not that people want to leave.
And I got to put you both on the spot. What do you think history can do for us now?
I would say that history teaches us how to behave, and it reinforces what we believe in and what we stand for. Lessons of history are lessons in appreciation. What we have all is the result of other people's work, other people's creative energy and drive. History gives us a sense of proportion about our own time here. And then there are the pleasures of history. It intensifies our experience of being alive.
I believe that it is a source of inspiration because a group of very flawed white men at the end of the 18th century managed to set us on a path, creating documents, both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, our mission statement and our user's guide, if you will, that gave us a North Star, a goal to seek, a standard to try to meet. And if the men and women who prevailed at Lexington and Concord and prevailed at Gettysburg and prevailed at Omaha Beach, if they could do it, then in the challenges of our time, we can too.
Jon Meacham and Dorie McCullough Lawson, the new book of writings by David McCullough is History Matters. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
This message comes from Capital One. The Capital One Venture X business card has no preset spending limit, so the card's purchasing power can adapt to meet business needs. Plus, the card earns unlimited double miles on every purchase, so the more a business spends, the more miles earned. And when traveling, the Venture X business card grants access to over 1,000 airport lounges. The Venture X Business Card. What's in your wallet? Terms and conditions apply. Find out more at CapitalOne.com/VentureXBusiness. This message is sponsored by DSW, the birthplace of the humble brag. Full of all kinds of shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. And when there are never-ending options for every style, mood, occasion, and budget, there is unlimited freedom to play. And that's something to brag about. So go ahead, stock up on fresh sneakers from your favorite brands, or try those boots you always secretly knew you could pull off. Find the shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. DSW, let them surprise you.
So much has been written about the American Civil War, you'd think there'd be nothing new to say about it. But in his new book, Midnight on the Potomac, The Last Year of the Civil War, the Lincoln Assassination and the Rebirth of America, Scott Ellsworth explores little-known corners of the story and destroys long-held myths around the assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. And in so doing, the author helps draw a line between that complex period in this country's history and our own tumultuous times.
What does history get wrong about the man who killed President Abraham Lincoln? Our next guest argues that John Wilkes Booth wasn't just a disturbed lone wolf, but was seen in his time as a charismatic genius of the American stage. He writes about Booth, Lincoln, and other key figures at the culmination of the Civil War, and what those lessons can teach us in today's polarized political climate. Scott Ellsworth is a professor in Afro-American and African Studies at the University of Michigan. His latest book is Midnight on the Potomac, The Last Year of the Civil War, the Lincoln Assassination, and the Rebirth of America. Scott, welcome to Here and Now.
Thanks so much. I'm thrilled to be on the show.
You've written that your fascination with the Civil War era began very young, and I can relate to that. I was kind of a nerdy kid who loved going to historic sites and watching documentaries, too, although I did not become a professor. But I wonder, what was the story that you were told about the Civil War as a young man,
Well,
boy?
the story that I was told about the Civil War, and incidentally at Robert E. Lee Elementary School in Tulsa, Oklahoma, that the war was a horrible event. It was a misunderstanding by sort of well-meaning white men on both sides. It wasn't about slavery. Certainly the namesake of our school, Robert E. Lee, was a revered figure. And certainly the Confederate generals were held in high regard. And these were American heroes on both sides of the war, and it was a terrible event, but one that we, got through and then were able to heal afterwards.
And how has your perception of that time in our history changed as you've gotten older and studied?
Well, it's changed and it's deepened in lots and lots of ways. And, over the years, this is over the course of maybe 50 years, I've been reading about the Civil War, touring the battlefields, studying it. I worked at the Smithsonian for a decade and would go by Civil War artifacts day by day. But the Civil War is, to this day, it remains the central, most important event in all of American history. And even more so than during the American Revolution, this is a time where what it was to be an American, what we believed, and who was going to be allowed to take part in this world's greatest experiment in democracy, these were in high relief. And there wasn't a family that wasn't affected by it.
Now, there have been, I'm sure, thousands of books written about the Civil War and about Lincoln. How did you go about writing and researching a book that covers so much familiar ground?
Well, it took some work. Sort of the way I got to it, in a way, was through John Wilkes Booth. And Booth wasn't at all like the version I had been taught. The version I had been taught, and maybe you too, was that Booth was this second-rate, actor living in the shadow of his far more famous father and brother, sort of a disturbed individual, kind of a prototype for a Hinckley or Lee Harvey Oswald. It turns out that Booth was an absolute superstar of the American stage. He sells out theaters from New York and Boston to Indianapolis and Cleveland and Chicago and Washington, D.C. Hundreds of people are turned away at his performances. Dozens of women stalk him outside of his dressing room, all of that. And once I realized that our version of Booth, the person, was so wrong, I got interested in diving deeper into him and to try to figure out what made him tick.
Yeah, it was really fascinating to read those details of his life. And one of the things I found most interesting was your description of the initial plot he appeared to be part of to kidnap President Lincoln. It just seems so implausible, and it didn't obviously come to fruition. But what was the goal of that initial plot?
Well, we're not entirely sure. I mean, there is strong evidence that Booth, we don't have a smoking gun, but we have a lot of smoke. And so there's strong evidence that Booth met with some Confederate Secret Service agents at the Parker House Hotel in Boston in the late summer of 1864. We know about a month later he meets with Confederate Secret Service agents and spy agency people in Canada, in Montreal. And then 3 weeks after that, he goes down to Baltimore, in his boyhood home of Maryland, and meets up with some high school buddies and tells them that he tried to gets them to go ahead and join him in this plot to kidnap the president. He says he knows the president's schedule. He knows when Lincoln is going to be riding from the White House to the summer home into the soldiers' home in the District of Columbia. He says he knows how to transport a body across the Potomac River and all this. Well, this isn't anything that John Wilkes Booth, an actor, thought up on his own. And so I think the idea was to kidnap the president and to use him, as a hostage to try to barter the end of the war, with the people of the North.
Now, the book isn't just about Lincoln and John Wilkes Booth. It also talks about some characters that are not as famous, including a Black minister named Henry Highland Garnett, who had been born into slavery until his family escaped. And he delivered what was apparently the first address in the U.S. Capitol given by an African American. How did you come across his story?
I had heard a little bit about Garnett, growing in graduate school and in college and whatnot. But as I dug into the story, one way I heard about him is I discovered, at least I discovered for myself, other people had discovered her earlier, an amazing female war correspondent by the name of Lois Adams. Lois Adams was a widow, a single mom from Michigan. She became the Washington, D.C. correspondent for some newspapers in Detroit. And there was a wonderful librarian who discovered her work and republished it. And she's one of the great journalists of the war. Nobody's ever heard of her. And she had written a long column about the time that Garnett spoke in the Capitol. And it was so powerful, and she was just so spot on that's one reason I put him in. He also represents a change that's happening. In Washington, D.C. was fairly small at the beginning of the Civil War. 40,000 enslaved people moved to Washington during the war. They changed the nature of the city, and many of them are also pushing in an early version of the civil rights movement to have equal treatment. And Garnett appearing at the Capitol and speaking at the Capitol with this thunderous speech is a big moment in that journey.
Now, you began your book with a note saying this is a book about how we almost lost our country. You were talking earlier about what a seismic event this was, the Civil War. What parallels do you see between that time and today?
We have never been more divided in my lifetime than we have in the last 8 or 10 years. And the only time in American history we had been so divided was, during the Civil War era. So that drew me very much to writing about the era. We live in a time when it's very difficult for people to view the other side as well-meaning human beings who have, the future of the country very much in mind. There was very little, freedom of speech in the South for years before the Civil War. So there were a lot of things and echoes that reminded me of it. And I wanted to remind us of the glories of some of our heroes and let us know that we have faced big struggles in the past and that we do have a track record of enduring some of them in the past, and we can build upon that and give us some confidence.
Scott Ellsworth is the author of Midnight on the Potomac, The Last Year of the Civil War, The Lincoln Assassination, and the Rebirth of America. Scott, thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you.
That's it for this week on NPR's Book of the Day. If you want more, you can sign up for our newsletter at npr.org/newsletter/books. Let us know what you think. You can write to us at bookoftheday@npr.org. I'm Chloe Veltman. The podcast is produced by Chloe Weiner and edited by Megan Sullivan. Our founding editor is Petra Mayer. The show elements for this week were produced and edited by Martin Patience, Samantha Balaban, Adriana Gallardo, Katie Klein, Ashley Brown, Matt Ozug, Catherine Welch, Samantha Raffleson, Shannon Rhodes, Andrew Craig, Todd Munt, and Ashley Locke. Yolanda Sangueni is our executive producer. Thanks for listening.
This comes from NPR sponsor Sierra. How businesses connect with customers defines their brand. Sierra is the platform for building better, more human customer experiences with AI. No stock answers, no hold music, just real solutions fast. Visit Sierra.ai to learn more. Support for NPR and the following message come from IXL Learning. IXL Learning uses advanced algorithms to give the right help to each kid no matter the age or personality. Get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when you sign up today at IXL.com/NPR.
This message comes from EasyCater, a business tool for food, helping organizations order food for meetings and events from favorite restaurants. With search tools for dietary needs, budget per person, and more. EasyCater also offers employee lunch programs, tools for managing food spend, flexible payment options, and simplified expense reporting. Plus 24/7 live support, all on one platform. Learn more at easycater.com.